Poetry. Poetry. It's everywhere. It's all around us all the time. We probably don't realise it, but where does poetry begin? I would say it begins the day we're born, and parents, grannies, granddads start reciting nursery rhymes. Certainly that's my earliest memories of poetry, which would have been the early 1950s. I remember, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Astronomy, it was educational. It got a little Tootie Bairn off to a flying start. Education, rhyme, lovely little words, twinkle, twinkle. Pussycat, pussycat, where have you been? I've been to London to see the fair queen. Pussycat, to London? My cat doesn't even leave the house, never mind go to London, never mind see the queen. What's going on there? This is rubbish, but it sounds lovely, doesn't it? Pussycat, pussycat, where have you been? Then, of course, I remember Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. So far, so good. Jack fell down and broke his crown. Jill came tumbling after. It's all going pear-shaped now, isn't it? Up Jack got and home did trot as fast as he could caper. He was sent to bed to mend his head. Now listen carefully. With vinegar and brown paper. Vinegar and brown paper in the early 50s. Every house had plenty of brown paper for wrapping gifts in, for wrapping food in, all sorts of stuff. And there was always a bottle of vinegar for preserving foods and for cleaning with and all. So there I was, just a little toddler of a laddie in the early 1950s, and I was learning a lot through nursery rhymes. And in particular, I knew that if ever I damaged this thing here, then all I had to do was scamper off home, and a parent or someone, a responsible adult, would break out the brown paper and the vinegar and all would be well. So, at the age of 5, I started primary school. It was actually the infant school in the village of Rowd near Devizes. All went well. It was an old-fashioned little school. It had outdoor toilets, and we were told one of the rules was don't run when you're out in the playground, because there's a sharp corner where the toilets are, and if you run into one another, you'll hurt yourselves. So no running. What did I do? Put my hand up. Please, miss, can I go to the toilet? Yes, of course you can, Kenneth. Don't run. So I ran around the corner as fast as I could, and a little girl was coming the other way. We collided. My eye was split open. I've got a slight scar to this day. The blood was certainly there, enough for me to have to lie down on the classroom floor with a tea towel under my head to soak up the blood while I waited for the vinegar and brown paper. Instead of that, I was carted off to Devizes to the hospital, where a man in a white jacket broke out a needle and thread and started sewing up my eye. There was no vinegar and brown paper. Now, this would have been 1955, so the NHS was in its very early days. So I guess maybe they could have been forgiven. They maybe hadn't quite gotten a proper supply of vinegar and brown paper. But worse was to come. I then moved up to Shetland and carried on my primary education at North of O School in Yale. And it was probably the first winter there. There was plenty of snow, and we made a slide. And we worked on it, packed the snow down, and slid back and forth until it was icy, really, really slippery. And then it was my turn to go again, and I gave it a good run, and I slid, and my feet went way out in front of me, up in the air. I went upside down, the back of my head cracked on the ground on the hard ice, and I was knocked unconscious. I was told later on that I was carried into the classroom laid on the floor in front of the stove, which was stoked up and a good heat was going. And I was left there until eventually I regained consciousness. I don't know how long it was, I can't remember it, but I remember opening my eyes and seeing the legs of a chair and the back of Mrs. Barclay, our teacher, and all the faces of the other school kids looking at me and starting to point, because I wasn't dead, I was still alive and I was moving. Mrs. Barclay turned round, told me I could now go back to my seat, to my desk, and carry on with my work. I had a splitting headache, I was seeing stars, and yet again, Jack and Jill let me down. There was no vinegar and there was no brown paper. So, that was that. By the time I was 9 years old, I decided that poetry, and in particular nursery rhymes, were a load of rubbish, a load of nonsense, and they weren't to be listened to and they weren't to be believed. So that was that. Until Christmas came, and I was told we had to learn a poem. Well, me and my cousin Sheila had to learn a poem and stand up on stage. I can remember some of the words to this day. A winkle went a walking with a whelk along the sand, and happily they chatted as they wandered hand in hand. They didn't talk of politics or silly things like that, but nature all around them was the subject of their chat. Their talk was rather simple, for I heard the winkle say, "Have you noticed that the sea is looking very wet today?" What a load of rubbish, a load of absolute nonsense. I was mortified. The only thing that saved the day, or that saved the night, was that I was in a winkle shell, a big thing made out of cardboard with a couple of eyes cut in it and string over my shoulders to hold the thing on. It was mortifying. So I'd already lost heart in poetry. By the time I'd done that, I couldn't stand poetry. It was awful. I was dead against it. And with that frame of mind, off I went to Lerwick, to the Anderson Educational Institute for secondary education. And there, Miss Nessie Robertson, our English teacher, gave us a book, The Golden Treasury. I've still got it. I wasn't allowed to give it back because I got kicked out of school before I started sixth year, but that's another story altogether. So thanks for that. And in The Golden Treasury, Nessie told us we had to recite and learn all sorts of poems. Blake, Wordsworth, Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. What a mortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry. What in the name of, what's fearful symmetry? It was never explained to me. I had no idea what we were talking about. It was more rubbish as far as I was concerned. Earth hath not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty. Wordsworth. Didn't understand what that was about. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vale and hill, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. I was all right. I knew what golden daffodils were. I'd never seen as many as that before, and I sort of imagined it wasn't too bad. But on the whole, the poems that we got in this little book here, I didn't understand them, and to be honest, I still don't. A sweet disorder in the dress kindles in clothes in wantonness. A lawn about the... What is this? How delicious is the winning of a kiss at love's beginning, when two mutual hearts are... Yeah, okay. It just goes on and on. In love, if love be ours, faith and... I still don't get the half of it. So, that was that until my English teacher, Nessie, dropped a bombshell and said we had to learn a poem off by heart completely. And then, individually, we had to stand up in front of the class and recite it. I thought, I can't learn any of this stuff in the Golden Treasury. I don't even know what it means. I don't understand it. How can I learn it? So, I fell back on a guy from a way, way back, goodness knows, the 30s and the 40s, Stanley Holloway, who wrote monologues. And I stood up in front of the class, and to Nessie's horror, I recited a monologue all about the Battle of Waterloo and a soldier called Sam Small who dropped his musket, and things went right to the top, right to the Duke of Wellington. It went something like this. It occurred on the evening afore Waterloo, and troops was lined up on parade, and Sergeant inspecting them, he were a terror of whom every man were afraid, all excepting one man. He were in the front rank, a man by the name of Sam Small, and him and Sergeant were both daggers drawn. They thought nought of each other at all. The sergeant passed by, he was swinging his arm, and he happened to brush against Sam, and knocking musket clean out of his hand, it fell to the floor with a slam. Pick it up, said Sergeant, abrupt like, but cool. But Sam, with a wave of his head, said, seeing as thou knocks it out me hand, perhaps thou picks thing up instead. Sam, pick up the musket. And the sergeant gets himself all in a bit of a condition about it, and things start going up through the ranks, because the Battle of Waterloo can't start until Sam picks up his musket. And a lieutenant comes along, Lieutenant Bird, says, well, what goes on here? And the sergeant told what had occurred. Sam, pick up your musket. And it goes on like that through the ranks until eventually it reaches the Duke of Wellington. Up rode the Duke on a lovely white horse, and him and old Sam looked at each other, and they looked at the musket, and he looked at old Sam, and he spoke to him just like a brother. Sam, pick up thy musket. The Duke said, as calm as could be. Sam, come on, lad, just to please me. All right then, says Sam, just for thee I'll oblige, and to show thee I meant no offence. Sam picked it up. Bravely, lad, said the Duke. Right-o, boys, let battle commence. Now, I got a small ripple of applause for that, and Nessie looked at me and she actually smiled. I think she enjoyed it. She asked me where I got that poem from. I wasn't too sure. Got it from somewhere. And I thought, that's proper poetry now. It's a little bit of history there, a little bit of humour, and it tells a story about how, the small man, the little man, has to be treated well. If you don't treat him well, then things won't happen. But if people in power and authority treat the people at the bottom of the ladder with respect, then all will go well, and the Battle of Waterloo can crack on ahead, and there's progress is made. So that was that. And I thought, well, maybe poetry isn't too bad after all. But I was getting well through school by this time, and I was having to start thinking about getting a job and what did the future hold. And I had ideas about perhaps being a vet, something like that. And we're now in the 1960s. I also remember thinking about being a lighthouse keeper. But no, there weren't many jobs going for that. I thought, wouldn't it be great actually, poetry, if Stan Holloway could make a living out of writing silly poems? Wouldn't it be great to be a poet and just wander the world, just making up poems and having them published in books and magazines and being invited to events and occasions and being the poet and reading some of your own work? What a great way of making a living. And I thought, well, how do you write? I'd never written a poem before. Well, blow me if I didn't write one. Not only that, it was published in the New Shetlander. I don't know how it got there. I think my mum found what I'd written and she sent it off. And it's called The Hill. And if you don't mind, I'll quickly read it to you. The Hill. The hill, bald, no trees to insulate it from the knife-edged north winds which tear unmercifully at what little vegetation there is to protect its ever-aging dome. The raging winter winds aggravate the sea, which in turn takes its revenge by crashing determinedly at the crumbling border between the sea and the hill. The clouds continually spill their fill upon it, and in winter when the snow drives hard, the hill like an old man hunches its back, supporting each flake. Then takes place that ever-dependable cycle of nature. With mocking laugh, each flake melts and joins forces with the next, forming streams and finally swollen cascades of water which tear painfully at the nakedness of the old man who sits in silent agony. Then, with temper sudden lost, the torturers with strange timidness flow into the gale-whipped seas like a shepherd's dogs, after having created some mischief, slink back to their angry master. Even in the quiet of summer, the old man must contend with yokels, cutting black, ugly peat banks deeper and deeper into its back, while its face is permanently scarred with a road irritated by traffic. Perhaps some day, with a sigh, the old man will collapse and settle down beneath the sea, where it will find peace. Where that came from, Lord if I know. But it was published anyway. So, I wrote that 55 years ago. How have things progressed since then with poetry? They haven't. That was it. I climaxed in the 1960s and petered out. That was it. Nothing since. Not quite. Just in the last 2 or 3 years, for some reason, I started scribbling little limericks. It's social media, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. You post a photograph that you've taken. Sometimes people like them, but you feel there should be a few words to go with it. And I thought if they rhymed, that would be fine. And I tried something out, just reflecting on when I retired, and I wrote this. There was a poor fellow called Kenny who worked all his life for a penny until he retired, which is when he required a penny but hadn't got any. I'm sorry. How ridiculous. So, anyway, I started putting up these photos with little ditties next to them. Here's the next one. Castlesea Bay isn't far from where we live here, and in an easterly gale, the waves break, and at high tide, the foam builds up, and you can end up with this creamy foam, literally chest deep. And I took a photograph of that and put a few words to it. Here's Castlesea Bay, just a short walk away from Auchmithie, the place now called home. But a windy November is when we remember our childhood and cremola foam. Does anybody remember cremola foam? Now, oh yes, now this one was, I wrote this in 2021. I had, much to my embarrassment, I had planted tatties, Duke of York tatties, which was a very year when Prince Andrew became well known to us all for all the wrong reasons. Anyway, as well as Duke of York tatties, I'd also planted runner beans, and my word, hadn't they done well. I was proud of my runner beans, took a photograph of them, posted them on Facebook, along with the following ditty. 3 cheers for this year's fine runner beans, fit for the royals, come kings and come queens. Let's send some to Lizzie, Charles, Edward and Cis. But should we perhaps give Prince Andrew a miss? And finally, just one more, just for the fun of it. Also in 2021, the field next to us had been planted in sprouts. And that's all very well, but when there's about, 20 acres of the bloomin' things, when they come to harvest them, they cut all of the leaves off, chop the tops off, and the stumps are left sticking out the ground. All these leaves are left lying around, the whole field is scattered with them, and they start to rot. I took a photograph of them, and these words went with it. Hoots toots, all gone are the sprouts, and the field is a landscape of slaughter. But give it a week, and as sure as I speak, the perfume will make our eyes water. So, there we are. That's as far as I've got with poetry. What a disaster, off to such a flying start, and it's all crumbled about my ears. So, what can we learn from all this? I think what we can learn is we have to give another generation of children a better opportunity, a better chance. So, we need good nursery rhymes that have clarity, simplicity and honesty. So for that, I suggest we turn to Spike Milligan. Something very short and simple. Ding, ding dong dell, pussy's in the well. Been there for weeks now. Blimey, what a smell. I'm sorry.